Awesome. Hi guys, I'm Jason Boucher. I'll be doing the More Week podcast, and today we have on Bethany Cunningham for our Mindfulness and Applying It podcast. She is a certified mindful meditation teacher who graduated St. Mike's in 1996.
Yeah.
Yep. And currently is teaching global lessons to families and teach about mindfulness, and especially in this current situation of very intense emotions that can be brought up, especially. So, Bethany, how are you doing today?
Yeah, good. I'm so inspired by this project and the work that you all are doing on campus, not just to raise awareness around mental health, but to kind of remove the stigma from it as well, and make it a conversation. It's such an important element right now. And I think there's never been a better time to have these conversations, considering all of the emotions that are arising during, everything, right? The pandemic, just day-to-day stress has this certain baseline. Then you add the pandemic, and then you add, what's happening in the world, politically, socially. It's a really wild and exhilarating time. I'm going to use that word.
Definitely. That's a very good word to put it. So based on these, what you said, these emotions are kind of just piling up. What are some emotions you experienced during quarantine, and how did you deal with them, and how do you suggest people dealing with certain emotions that you've kind of learned about?
Yeah, it's interesting because the bulk of my work prior to the pandemic was really working with youth in schools, and teaching them skills to self-regulate and manage their emotions and their stress and anxiety. And there was a big pivot that happened where all of a sudden students who weren't normally, and individuals really, not even my students, I was suddenly getting calls from parents as well, who didn't normally experience anxiety, were having these amazing anxiety responses and stress responses to what was going on. So it was interesting to kind of observe that shift in my work and in people's experience. For me personally, I had trauma re-triggered from my youth that honestly, I never thought I would go back to that space in my life. I thought I had worked through it all and done all the work. And certainly at the time, we're talking about middle school through some of my years at St. Mike's, I was experiencing the effects of this and the impact of that. And I had done a lot of work around it, and it came back full force over the summer where it hit me. It really floored me, flattened my ability to function for a day. What was helpful is because I now have these skills, I was able to kind of recognize what was happening, so I could observe it. I felt the pain of it and the discomfort, and certainly didn't want to go through that again. And also a sense of curiosity. And that's, I think, one of my big takeaways from being mindful. It's not just a practice for me. It's really, for me, a way of living. It's kind of how I live my day-to-day life. So it was really a remarkable circumstance for me to find myself reliving some of this really painful, awful experience emotionally, and observing it differently now with the skill set and the experience, that I had going through it the first time. It certainly wasn't the same, but it was still painful and awful and hard. And I think that, the three top emotions that I am witnessing in others are really fear, loss, and grief, are the big emotions that are surfacing for many people right now, of all ages, really.
Gotcha. And I guess, how would you, or you can share an experience that you had, or just in general, but how would you say you kind of coped and kind of recognized those emotions, and also how do you kind of get past them, if you have or not? And that's okay if you haven't. I bet a lot of people haven't.
I mean, I think every experience we have becomes a part of us, and it's an opportunity to learn and grow. when I was younger, and certainly when I was going through this, and even in my years at St. Mike's, anxiety wasn't really a term. I don't even know that stress was a term.
Mm,
Busy was something we used a lot, but we didn't have that terminology. And so there was a lot we didn't know about how to handle it. And with, the training that I've had and the work that I've done, both for myself and with others, I think one of my takeaways for experiencing trauma and anxiety and stress personally is it allows me to connect better with the people that I'm working with, because I get it. Like,
mm,
it's hard. It can be insidious sometimes. It has this lovely little voice that it puts in
mhm,
your mind to
yeah.
convince you of things that make you think you're not capable of, and send you down this negative thought spiral. So I'm grateful for that experience, because it's taught me how to navigate it differently, how to see it for what it is, to know that it's temporary, and to ground myself in the moment. So when I was experiencing that, thankfully it was kind of a flood to my system for a day, but I was in full fight, flight, or freeze response.
Mm,
So at that point, it's really hard to tap into a meditative practice.
yeah.
Your brain just can't go there. Or mine couldn't anyway. So I really grounded myself in sensory experiences, just noticing how my feet felt on the floor, taking some full breaths to kind of settle my breathing, my heart rate, closing my eyes and just noticing how my eyes felt. Or I would look for certain colors in the room that I was in, and I would walk, because movement kind of activates both sides of your brain at the same time and helps bring some alignment back to your nervous system. So I tried, all of those tips and tricks, but, at the end of the day, it helped. It didn't take it away. And I think one of the myths about mindfulness is that you just, it's a flip of a switch and you feel better if you meditate every day. And it really isn't that
Mm,
way. It's not that simple. It helps you to observe your thoughts and observe your emotions without getting sucked into them. So even though this was
mm,
such a flood to my system, there was still space where I was observing what was happening, tuning into my body, and utilizing skills to just work through it rather than dismiss it or cast it aside. So it took me a good day to work through that. But at
gotcha.
the end, the next day, I was okay again. So
Mm. And I guess from personal experience, like especially over quarantine, when we were at home. It was hard, definitely, just being at home and being like I could be doing things that I should be doing, I guess, in that sense. But emotions definitely kind of have a very interesting way of just taking over your body and taking over your thoughts. And I definitely experience a lot. Like, how would you? I guess the difference between how you and I handled it would be, I guess I'm kind of just summarizing, but would be you observed that you were experiencing it and had that space in your minds that allowed you to observe it and to recognize it. Compared to myself, I would kind of absorb myself in that emotion and kind of just react based on that emotion. Would you, like, is there any, I guess, advice you would have on how to handle that as well?
yeah, I
Mm,
mean, one of the things that I teach is along those lines. We have an early warning system, and our body will signal an emotion before the brain has figured it out.
mm,
So we have certain reactions to certain stressors or certain emotions, and that can be different for everyone. I mean, I had one woman who I did a workshop with, and when she was feeling stressed, her thighs would tighten and tense up.
mm,
So most people will feel, when an emotion begins to kind of flood their system, things start to go offline, because you start to go into this kind of fight, flight, or freeze primitive brain response, right? So what begins to happen physiologically is the brain starts to take non-essential items offline. So your stomach might feel a little bit nauseous, your breathing, your heart rate goes up. You might feel really energized in your arms and legs because they're ready to run. Your body's
huh,
preparing
mm,
to run away or to fight something or to just be still and freeze in the
gotcha.
moment. So when you can identify what your body is doing, it creates a space in which you can maneuver through the emotion differently. So you don't get caught up in it because you're observing, oh, wait, this is really bizarre that I'm feeling my heart rate, increase right now, or I'm feeling really antsy, like I need to move. And so when you can indulge that in a healthy way, like if you are feeling that need to move, you can go for a walk or do some yoga or move your arms and just stretch. It doesn't need to be a huge amount of time that you carve out, but it creates enough space where you can name what's happening. And once you name the feeling, this sounds so simplistic, but once you can name how you're feeling, you are then bringing your self-regulatory system back online. So you're bringing your prefrontal cortex back online and re-engaging it so it can help you regulate the emotion once again.
Wow.
So I hope that makes some sense.
No, it definitely does. That's, yeah, I mean, that's a great tool that obviously would you say it takes practice to do that?
It does. I mean, you have
Mm.
to really tune into your body and create some awareness of what's happening. Like for instance, I had an issue a couple of years ago where I was struggling with this other person, and I wasn't really recognizing the stress it was creating for me. And so I was having chest pains, like to the extent that I probably was considering going to the doctor. I was like, I probably need
Wow.
to see a doctor about this. And I realized one day, I was like, this is so bizarre that I'm having, like, I would have it periodically throughout the day. Usually it would be first thing in the morning. And I was like, what is this? Because I'm a relatively healthy person. I exercise, I eat well, I do all the right things.
Mm-hmm.
Why would I be having this? And I started thinking about this person, and I recognized, oh my gosh, this is anger. Like, I am angry. And the moment I was able to identify that I was feeling this intense anger, the feeling and the sensation dissipated.
Wow.
Now, that's not to say that that's what's going to happen for everyone all the time. But when you can name an emotion, like I said, when you're able to kind of identify that that's what's happening, you're bringing the brain back online that is responsible for emotional regulation and self-control. So when you do that, you then can navigate the feeling very differently and more thoughtfully, and you can respond instead of react to it.
Gotcha. I think that's a good term. Respond versus reacting. When you can respond to something, you're much more kind of focused, maybe dialed in, whereas reacting is just split second and you just go kind of without thinking.
Right. It's like putting your hand on a hot stove. You don't stop to think, wow, that's really hot, I should probably take my hand off of it, right? You just pull it off. And that area of the brain, that amygdala response, is a really important aspect of our brain because it does keep us safe and prevents us from harm. When it gets overused and it becomes overactive, however, it can produce some problems with reactivity and high levels of stress and anxiety.
And would you say that mindfulness, or like being in a practice of mindfulness, is am I using that term correctly? Like being in a practice of mindfulness or a state of mindfulness?
Yeah, I mean, you can, yeah.
Okay.
Mindfulness is kind of a broad brushstroke right now. It's used for a lot of things, and it's a big catchphrase. And I think a lot of people don't necessarily understand what it means or what it does or what it is to be fully present and mindful. But mindfulness means, you're just paying attention to what's happening right now on purpose and without judgment. So, it's a pretty basic definition of what that is. So you don't necessarily have to be meditating to be mindful, right? It's about self-awareness. It's about noticing what you're doing in a given moment with your full and total presence in that space. So for me, yeah, I mean, you can practice mindfulness, you can embody mindfulness. I think people have varying degrees of how they incorporate it into their lives. And it is a skill. It's a skill set. It's like being an athlete, right? You are training and practicing, and the more you practice at it, the better you get. It's the same with mindfulness. You're literally creating a network in the brain that allows you to be more responsive. So you're less likely to reach those high levels of reactivity, those extreme highs and lows of emotion when you are consistently practicing some form of mindfulness every day.
Gotcha. And how would you recommend people to, or like, how do you recommend people to practice that daily or just to kind of get started practicing, because I like, my mom's a yoga instructor, so I've kind of had a little experience with mindfulness and being in the present and just kind of feeling your body where it is and where it is like at that time. But how would you kind of recommend people starting, and like, or maybe getting a little more intense and trying to really focus in daily on being mindful?
Yeah, I mean, yoga is an amazing mindful practice, in my
Mm,
opinion, because not only are you kind of regulating your breath, but you're moving your body at the same time. So you're activating both sides of the brain at the same time with that. And so it's so beneficial for that reason, to really create some balance
mhm,
um, for your nervous system. I would say for people just starting out, it is important for most to have some type of guidance with it.
okay.
Because what can happen is, if you dive into the meditative piece of mindfulness, if you have experienced trauma, some of that can be retriggered by closing your eyes and just allowing your brain to just focus on one thing. Your
Mhm,
mind wants to wander. It wants to think about everything but your breath, right? So without somebody who is trauma informed with experience, kind of walking you and guiding you through that, I would tread a little carefully, depending on your history, with a meditative practice of mindfulness. There's a ton of apps, Calm, Headspace, drawing a blank on a few of those others, Insight Timer, where they have guided meditations that you can try. And they're guided, like you're
mhm,
fully guided through that, which is probably the easiest way to start, is just listening to someone's voice guide you through a full meditation. But there are also other ways. There's an amazing children's book called Mindful Monkey, Happy Panda. It's written by Lauren Aldifer. And I read this to my preschool kiddos. And I actually use it as an example for even my adult students. But the story goes that, Mindful Monkey walks up to Happy Panda, and he's like, I don't understand why you're so happy all the time, because we do all of the same things, but you're so happy and I don't experience that same happiness. And so Panda says, well, what are the things that we do that are the same? And Monkey says, well, I work, I play, I eat, I sleep. And Panda's like, yeah, I do all of those things too. And Panda says, well, what are you thinking about when you're doing those things? And so Monkey says, well, when I'm working, I'm thinking about playing. And when I'm playing, I'm thinking about eating. And when I'm eating, I'm thinking about walking. And, he's always thinking about something else. And his monkey mind is jumping from one thing to the next. And
mm,
Panda says, well, that's the difference. When I'm eating, I'm just eating. And when I'm playing, I'm just playing. And so the beauty of mindfulness and that story for me is, you can relate to that, right? We can all relate to those moments where, particularly as a college student, where you walk into class and your mind is on the next class that you have, or a paper you've got due later on, or a practice that you're not sure you're going to make it to because you've got a lab later, and how am I going to juggle all of this schedule? And so your mind is always spinning on either planning what's next or ruminating about something that happened earlier.
mhm.
And then you're missing information that might be really relevant to an exam you have
Certain
later
class.
on,
Yeah.
right? So it's important to ground yourself by noticing your senses. Is a really easy way to bring mindfulness into your space and time. Um, Noticing how your hands feel, rubbing them together, and just noticing what that feels like. Noticing how it feels as you're walking and your feet are touching the ground, or what your socks feel like on your feet or your shoes. Bringing awareness to sounds. That's probably one of my favorite meditations to do, actually, is just to notice different sounds
Hmm.
around me, and identify them and just pay attention to them for a few moments, is a really great one. So sensory experiences can be very mindful and grounding. Meditation, if you're just beginning, it's lovely to do it when it's fully guided, and there's plenty of kind of examples of that and opportunities for that on YouTube, or a number of mindfulness apps that can guide you through that.
Gotcha. Wow. Thank you for those, are great resources that I will probably end up using hopefully shortly.
Right?
I'm just gonna change the Wi-Fi real quickly, because I think it might be on my end, but it's just being weird. So just give me 1 second. Oh, you there?
Mm-hmm. Is it
Oh,
breaking up?
nice. No,
I
it's good
could
now.
change mine too.
Awesome. All right, great. So now so I read in your bio that you like to, now correct me if I'm wrong, but you enjoy helping people find their emotional balance. What does that mean to you? And kind of, if you could describe a little more, that would be awesome.
Yeah, I mean, what's amazing about being able to do this work is that I really get to experience someone else's journey. We each have our own experience with emotions, with stress, with worry. And so the beauty of that is that I get to kind of watch someone else navigate it. We each kind of come to this space differently, right? We react and respond to things differently. We have different experiences, even if we're sharing in something. We can have two different experiences with that, right? And which is kind of one of the activities that I will frequently do with people is just ring a bell and have them notice how that bell sounds. And when they're done hearing it, I ask them to just raise their hand and open their eyes. And in that process, it's a simple, right? It's just a simple activity of ringing a bell. And I ask you to just open your eyes and raise your hand when you're done. What happens in that activity is when the hand is raised and people open their eyes, not everyone does it at the same time. So even though there's this same trigger for everyone, everyone's either holding their attention differently. Some people are hearing it for longer because maybe they're sitting closer to me. Some people are really, laser focused on it, so they're hearing it for longer. So it's a beautiful example of how we all kind of come to an experience where we can share, much like the pandemic. We're all sharing in this experience together, but we're all experiencing that experience differently, if that makes sense.
Yeah. Mm-hmm.
So what I get to do when people come to me is really allow them to create their own realizations and awareness about what's happening for them, what's happening with their kind of emotional state, their mindset. And I do another activity with, I think, almost all of my students where we notice habits. We notice when we're on autopilot. So I give them a task of identifying one habit that you do every single day without thinking about it, right? So it could be tying your shoe, it could be putting a jacket on, it could be washing your hair, turning a doorknob, flipping a switch, anything that you do kind of every day without thinking about doing it, right? You just kind of do it and you don't think about it. So I ask you to draw your attention to that every time you do it. And I ask you to do that practice for a solid week. What that does is my goal isn't necessarily that you are going to have this incredible mindful presence and like have this laser sharp focus on identifying that every time you do it. My hope is that you start to recognize how frequently you're on autopilot and you're doing things without thinking. Because once you have that awareness, you can start creating awareness of what else am I doing that I'm not really thinking about? Yeah. And that opens a door to really understanding where your thoughts are going, how your emotions are impacting what you're doing and how you're, behaving or responding or making decisions. So I really choose to start with kind of small things that open a much broader mindset and awareness for people. It's small, easy tasks, but they create tremendous amounts of awareness in those small tasks.
Gotcha. So basically what you're saying is that instead of being on autopilot when you're doing these tasks, be off autopilot and figure out what you're actually thinking. Is that kind of what
so you bring so let's say you, I think the first time I did this practice when I was challenged with this, I chose to focus on turning a knob. So anytime I was turning like a faucet knob to wash my hands or whatever, I was supposed to bring my full attention to it. So what does the knob feel like? What's the temperature of it? Is it hard or is it soft? Is it cool or warm? Is it rough or smooth? Just for a few seconds, you're just kind of really noticing that I am turning a knob right now. That's it. So I had a full week to practice this. I noticed it twice in that week. And the second time, I'm kind of cheating because my daughter reminded me as I was doing it that I needed to be paying attention to that. But it was such a great practice of recognizing, gosh, I have this one thing I have to pay attention to. I've been assigned this
Yeah.
one thing, and I'm not even able to bring my attention fully to that. So
Hmm.
what else am I not bringing my attention fully to that really could use my attention more? Was my kind of takeaway from that. And for other people, it's different, but it's a great way to identify, how frequently you are on autopilot with certain things. And the tasks that we do very routinely, we can do on autopilot. They don't necessarily need our attention.
Hmm.
But when we bring our attention to those things fully, we're creating, again, that pathway in the brain that helps us become more responsive and emotionally regulated.
Gotcha. And as we're talking about this, I'm not like scared, but it's just like, wow, like thinking about all the things I like actually do on autopilot. Like there's a lot.
There is a lot.
Yeah.
Yeah. And we're kind of, our brain is wired for that now. Like
Mm.
our culture kind of sets us up for that. We're not wired any longer to pay attention to one thing for very long. We have the attention span, I saw somewhere, of a goldfish. It's like, it's crazy. But
Yeah.
what happens is the things that trigger that are anytime something moves visually, your amygdala gets triggered. Like, do I need to prepare to react to this? What do I need to
Mm.
do to keep you safe? And so things like scrolling on social media have that impact because it's moving, right? When you're watching the news and there's information scrolling along the bottom of the screen, or there's a window with video rolling and there's all these different moving parts, that's activating that system as well. And so that's part of the reason we're frequently on autopilot. Aside from those day-to-day routines, those are hardwired. Those connections are so well ingrained in our brain that we don't need to think about them. So the brain is like, yeah, you got that locked in, you're good.
Mm-hmm.
But when we do draw our attention to those, it does reconnect the part of our brain that can deactivate some of those responses from our other activities that we do day to day. It's a great little
Gotcha.
counter effect.
Yeah. Wow. That's very, yeah, it's pretty cool. All right. Now, one of the questions I've just been kind of wondering is morning routines. What do you think about them, and how do you like use them maybe differently than I do? Because I get up if my class is at 8:30, I get up at 8:10 and get dressed and then just go right to class. But like, what do you kind of think of morning routines? If you think of them more than just a morning routine, or what are your kind of thoughts on that, I guess?
I think that establishing a routine is a great way to create a new habit. And when it's in the morning, that's wonderful. You have accomplished something at the beginning of your day and you can check that box and say, I did it, right? So
Mm-hmm.
if it's a self-care piece, you did that piece, you made yourself a priority first and foremost in your day. And that's a pretty awesome way to start your day, right? But for a lot of people, maybe that morning routine isn't going to really fit well with their
Mm-hmm.
schedule. So you need to, whenever you're establishing a new habit, make sure you're doing it at a time that works for you, that you can commit to doing it, right?
Gotcha. Okay.
So if it's in the morning, that's wonderful. Like I said, you're starting your day off with, some self-care or doing something that fills your bucket, and you've started your day that way. But for some people, it's doing it at the end of the day to release everything that's come up for them during the day. And for others, it's midday to kind of break it up.
Mm-hmm.
So it really is individual in finding the time and space that works best for you. I find with people who are trying to establish a routine of meditation is a funny thing because it can be really vulnerable. It's hard. It's not easy.
Yeah.
And people are quick to give it up for that reason, right? When you're starting a new habit, to be consistent about it is challenging. So
Yeah.
it really makes a difference, whatever you're deciding to create as maybe self-care for yourself, is to do it at the same time every day. So figure out the time that works best for your schedule and do it every single day at that time.
Gotcha.
And do it to make yourself a priority, because we all need that right now so much.
Gotcha. And is there any suggestions you would have about, I guess, not creating habits, but being able to follow those habits throughout like days? Because like you said, like when you were talking about the 2 times or the week you had to do to feel the faucet, it's like when you were talking, I was like, there's no way I would be able to do that like every time. Like I really just didn't think I could. So like, is there any advice you have on gaining more ability to create habits, I guess?
Yeah, I mean, I think one, like I said, establishing the same time of day
Hmm.
and doing it every day, and having some self-compassion when you don't do it, right? It's
Mm.
not the end of the world. You have an opportunity to begin again. And I think that's another piece of mindfulness that I fully embrace and love so much is every moment is an opportunity to begin. So if you've missed it, don't beat yourself up over it. Start again tomorrow. Start again right there in that moment if you have the ability to do that. And I think, whatever you're choosing, make sure that it's something initially that you're interested in. Create a buddy system if that helps.
Mm.
A lot of my high school students, when I'm working with them, I create some type of tagline that they have to text one another at some point during the day each day. So they partner, they buddy up, and they text somebody, text someone a dot or a letter
Mm.
that just reminds them, take a breath right now in this moment. Just notice where you are right here and right now. Just be right here, right now.
That's really cool.
So yeah, so you can create a buddy system, which always helps you kind of
Hmm.
engage and do that. Yeah, I love that particular one. That's one that really does help.
Yeah, that's
They'll send a note to just breathe, or they'll send just the letter B. But that, put a sticky note on your dresser, or on something that you're going to see first thing every day on the door,
hmm
right? That reminds you to do something. So even if it's as simple as taking 10 full slow breaths before you start your day, that seems really simple when I say it to you. When you take 10 full slow simple breaths, you will find you might feel a bit impatient about those 10 full slow
Yeah.
breaths, right? It's
Yeah.
not as easy in practice as it sounds. So it does take, really setting yourself up to succeed with that. So creating a buddy system, setting the same time every day to do that, or establishing one thing that you're going to do that you can put a sticky note on. For my adults, I'll say, when you're at a stoplight, just notice your breath. Just let your nervous system settle in when you're just stopped at a stoplight behind the
Hmm.
wheel.
Wow. That's great advice. Thank you. The texting thing is really cool. That's pretty cool. Just because you can kind of look out for other people and be like, oh, you're my friend. Like, I care about you. That's one aspect of it. And the other is like, here's like not advice, but just like remember to just literally breathe. And
Yeah.
that's pretty cool.
And whatever you're going through in that moment,
Hmm.
taking that breath can kind of recenter whatever is happening for you. One of the things when I go into classrooms that I ask two questions. I ask, what time is it? And I ask, where are you?
Mm.
And the answer that I'm looking for after I've walked them through this a little bit, but the answer I'm looking for is, what time is it? Is it's right now. And where are you is right here.
Oh.
Because no matter
Hmm.
where you are, you're right here. And no matter what time it is on the clock, it's right now,
Hmm.
right? So
Wow.
it's just, again, a little recentering tool to just bring yourself into this moment, particularly for an exam or a test, or writing a paper when you're finding you want to do everything but
Write a
re-edit that
paper.
paper
Yeah.
for like the
Yeah.
millionth time.
Hmm.
It's a great tool to just be like, okay, I'm right here, I'm right now, and take that breath, and then proceed with a little more space in your brain to help you with that.
That's really cool. I'm gonna use that. That's awesome.
Great.
Now, not to bring you back to writing papers, but um,
Yeah.
if you could go back to college or some place where you were, as you would put it, well, not you would put it, but as you used to put it, busy, but what I would call stressed or anxious, or what would you do differently and kind of why, I guess?
Yeah, it's funny, the writing the paper thing. I was invited to a conference at Oxford University, and I
Oh,
had to write a
wow.
paper to be accepted for this
Dang.
conference. And I hadn't written a paper since college, so it
Hmm.
was a good like 20 plus years that I had written a paper. And I had like resources all over my dining room table, and I'm scrambling to remember how to cite references
Yeah, APA. Yeah.
and write this paper. And it
Hmm.
really like blew my brain up. And it was accepted, thankfully. I
Congratulations. That's
Thank you. Yeah,
incredible.
but it rocked my world, and I had a full panic attack from getting on the plane in Boston to landing in Oxford, to landing in London, and then getting on a bus to go to Oxford.
Wow.
Yeah, in fact, when I landed, I called my husband. I was like, yeah, no, I'm going home. Like this, who am I, right? This, at the time, mindfulness was not something that was broadly known here. And I was working in schools and having a lot of resistance from parents. And so it was
Wow.
an uphill battle for me for those first probably 3 years that I was doing this work. So it was a terrifying prospect for me to say, well, yes, I wrote this paper on mindfulness in education, and it was accepted, but what am I walking into? And Oxford University has an entire school devoted to mindfulness. So I was like, why
Oh,
on
wow.
earth? So it was a kind of a crazy, surreal experience, but it did bring me back to my college experience in a lot of ways. There was a lot of anxiety, right? And
Mm,
stress over writing those papers and trying to do it perfectly. And I
mm,
really wanted to get it right every time. And I would go over and over and over those papers to make sure that the language was right, or that I was saying the right thing, or that I had supported my statements. And
mm-hmm.
um, I think if I had to do it again, knowing what I know now, I would have enjoyed that process more.
Oh,
Because
interesting.
I will say that as stressful as writing that paper for that conference was, there was something so exciting about that process in it too,
Mm,
about breaking mindfulness down in a way that would be accepted to a global audience was very exciting. And I wish that I had been able to embrace the work while I was in school that I was doing at the time. I think it was always just such a race to, I got to get this subject taken
yeah.
care of, and then I've got this paper to do. And I never really fully gave a lot of attention to the work that I was putting into each specific piece.
Well, and it's hard too, because it's like you realize how much relies on this one paper. It's like you look at this one paper, and especially now, and from the transition from high school to college, it's like, oh, there's plenty of like filler grades, there's plenty of homework assignments, and then it's college, it's like 3 tests, 60% of your grade. Like, don't don't do bad on
Right.
one, or else it's screwed, and then your GPA, and then like,
Right. Yeah.
so
It's
it's
palpable.
hard.
Yeah,
Hmm.
it's palpable. And you feel that kind of sitting on your shoulder as you're doing it. So it's hard to kind of embrace that. I think, in the grand scheme of things, what I learned at St. Mike's was, the support and the sense of community. I didn't reach out enough to that at the time, certainly. But at the same time, despite how I got through all those classes and those papers,
Hmm.
and that, that stress of, oh my gosh, I've got to submit this and I got a bad grade on that, so I really have to knock this one out of the park. It set me up for where I am today and the work that I'm doing today. And I know that if I hadn't had those experiences, both at St. Mike's and even my experiences of grief and loss and trauma and hardship, I wouldn't be doing the work that I'm doing today, and I wouldn't be where I am today without those experiences. So I'm grateful for all of it. I mean, even the panic attack, I was grateful for that because it allowed, and I knew it at the time. I was like, yeah, I need to do this for whatever reason. I have to feel this right now, and whatever the reason is, it will be revealed to me in some form or fashion. And it really does help me do this work with people who are experiencing high levels of stress, anxiety, even trauma. Certainly when I go into classrooms, I am dealing with circumstances. I'm usually called in crisis situations, right? So
Mm,
I'm dealing with students who are having a real hard time navigating
mm,
emotions and self-regulating for a variety of reasons. When I can relate to their experience and when I can be with them in that experience, it makes all the difference. So I don't label them as good or bad. They just, I think everything is helpful, and it's there for a reason.
gotcha. And like, I guess one thing I'm realizing through this conversation is like, not to say that panic attacks, like, not that they center yourself, but they allow for an emotion to come through. And when you can recognize that and use that as not a tool, because panic attacks are very serious and very, yeah. You
Painful.
know, yes, yes. But like you said, you're not grateful for the panic attack, but use that panic attack to be like, okay, like I did this and I got through it, and you can call on that experience to be like, I can do this again, and maybe it won't be as bad as the time you did it before, I guess.
Oh,
Does that make
absolutely. And
sense?
that's
Yeah.
part of anxiety. I mean, I will also admit I was exhausted and I hadn't eaten
Oh,
because I was so nervous. So that
yeah,
certainly contributed as well. So I definitely got something to eat once I landed, and I went
that's
for a
good.
walk again to activate both sides of my brain and try to
In
settle my.
London, that's pretty cool too.
It was pretty. Yeah, I'm not going to
Yeah,
lie. It was awesome. It was
yeah, I
awesome.
believe it.
And it was the first time that my work was fully accepted and embraced, where people were actually seeking me out to talk with me about it. And it was, I was so like, are you sure I'm not sure
The
I'm the one you're
person,
talking to.
yeah.
Like, I don't, that's not, it was not normal to me at all to
Hmm.
be in that space, but it gave me such an amazing experience and platform to recognize the work was important. It was necessary, and I needed to keep doing it, and having the support of these people. One gentleman in particular who he had developed a program in India teaching compassion and mindfulness to teachers in India, and also providing life skill training to
Mm.
students. He was just a remarkable human. You know, he's one of those people you meet and you can just hang on his every word. You know, just everything he said was so insightful and amazing.
Mm.
And if I had taken nothing else but from meeting him, it would have all been worth it.
Gotcha.
But so much more came from that, you know, and every single one of my students came with me in that journey in my mind, and my teachers. And one of the things, the conference itself, it's now a full longitudinal study that they're doing over from this year. I was supposed to be in Nairobi last year, but they had a terrorist attack, and
Ooh.
then back in London this year for the launch of this global initiative. And one of the things that was so remarkable, there were two things that came out of that conference that I took away that are so important to recognize for now during this time. And this was 3 years ago now. The conference itself was, you know, what is the meaning of education during times of uncertainty?
Oh, that's
And
pretty prevalent right now.
yeah,
You're right. Yeah.
right. Like, and back
Mhm.
then it was too, because there were, you know, we were experiencing a lot of terrorism throughout the world, and trying to figure out how do we educate students in kind of these war-torn areas of the world. And two things came from that. As I was writing the paper, I glued in to the word uncertainty, and I asked my students from like 4th grade through high school,
Mm.
what does uncertainty mean to you? What's the first word that pops into your mind when you hear that word? And most of them said, you know, fear, frustration, overwhelming, you know,
Doubt.
doubt, like
Yeah.
just negative things. And one of my students said exhilarating.
Huh.
And I was like, that's
Wow.
amazing.
Yeah.
I will never forget that.
Wow.
I'll never forget that
Exhilarating.
student. I'll never forget that term. And I was like, you're right. Like, we can see these times of uncertainty as exhilarating. They don't have to
Mm.
necessarily be heavy and overwhelming and fear-inducing and debilitating at times. His words opened the conference. I happened to share that story with the person who was convening the conference, and his words like opened the conference. And I was like,
Wow.
I was just so blown away that here was my student's voice, you know, being kind of projected to this group of people from around the world. It was just an amazing experience. And the other piece that was really life-changing for me too, there was this gentleman from Northern Ireland. He teaches acting to troubled youth in Northern Ireland.
Mm.
And he was talking about, you know, back in the 80s when the IRA was in full force and there were bombings in Northern Ireland all the time. Like, you know, throughout the day, I think there was one day they had 17 plus bombings in Belfast.
Wow.
And he kept referring to that time as the Troubles.
Mm.
And I just loved that term. I was like, here we are talking about terrorism, and the Irish call it the Troubles.
The trouble.
Plus, the trouble sounds so much better
It
than
does. Right.
terrorism, right?
Yeah.
But we've created a lot of terms that do incite certain emotions for us. And we're using a lot of them now with the pandemic, right? Unprecedented, uncertainty, uncertain times. It's not normal. All of those terms incite certain emotions and feelings for us, where if we just kind of flipped the lens or shifted it or pivoted it just a little bit, it could also be seen as a time of exploration, right? Of creativity, of opportunity, of wonder, even of, crafting something new that needed to be created. So I reflect on that conference. That conference was very life-changing for me in my work and in my perspective of just thinking about the world, thinking about, our own place in it differently.
And someone, kind of going back to what you said, someone told me before quarantine started, they said, this is the closest you will ever get to free time in your entire life. And like, it's true, right? We didn't as a college student, online classes, then like what else was there to do? So he was like, just try and learn 3 things throughout this. So I my roommate learned how to play the piano. I learned how to play the guitar, and just kind of different things that we were able to do that we definitely wouldn't have if we were on campus. And so I learned how to play like different card games. I know that's very simple, but it's an opportunity to kind of look on the positive side and be like, I can do something with this time that's very uncertain, is a word that's very prevalent. But it's pretty cool.
It is, the entire world was on hold, right? And it was so amazing to even see virtually how people were coming together from around the world. Was remarkable. And to use that time to learn something new, like how amazing is that, right? You wouldn't have taken that time to do that. And once, when you're in college, there's just so much you're thinking about and doing, and so many things going on campus, that you're not taking that time necessarily, unless you're really passionate about, have this innate drive to learn something new. You're not necessarily going to take that time to do it. So there is a lot that's been offered in this time and in this space for that.
Yeah, definitely. All right, I think that's it for me for questions. If you have anything else to say, or if you want to talk about anything or have any questions for me, I don't know, feel free to ask me. But if not, thank you very much for joining and taking the time to do this. It was incredibly insightful for me, at least, and I hope the community as well really finds this insightful. But yeah, thanks for coming. And if you have any closing statements, feel free to say so.
Oh, great. Well, thank you. I think the only thing I will leave with is, the sense of self-care is not selfish. It's necessary. And when you can create that space for yourself, whether that's through mindfulness, whether that's through yoga, whether that's through exercise, or just doing something that, fills your bucket and gives you some sense of peace of mind or joy. We need now more than ever to be doing that, and to be coming together and supporting one another in that when we need. And we rise by lifting others. And I think this is really such a beautiful time to fall on a sense of community and support one another in these efforts of caring for ourselves and caring for one another. And I'm so grateful to all of you who are putting this week on and putting the time and energy into this, because it's so important. And the ripple effect of this will be, no doubt in my mind, very profound and very helpful for everyone who's able to experience it.
Definitely. And that's what we're trying to do. We're very excited. We hope we're spreading awareness and, striving for more. So, yep. So thank you guys for watching. Thank Bethany for her time, and we hope to see you hopefully soon, and stay safe. And just good luck with, I hope to see you in an Oxford paper again, hopefully, or whatever you're doing.
Yes.
Yeah. Awesome.
Thank you.
All right.
Thanks so
guys.
much, Jason.